Hi there, and welcome to Lesson 5. So in this lesson, we're going to go over the concept of rhetorical analysis, which is what I'm asking you to do in your first major writing project that's due. The rough draft is due this week, and the final draft is due next week. So I've tried to keep the reading load very light. The reading load for this lesson is just some handouts on writing and then some sample papers. And next week, there'll be no reading. So you can really focus on your paper. This question or this lesson will also be shorter, too, for that reason. And so it's all one lecture. It's not broken up into several parts like the previous ones. And we've already talked about rhetorical analysis a great deal because I've been explaining how to do it in the last 2 lessons and how specifically to do it for this paper with an analysis of an Agatha Christie story, Hercule Poirot story to be specific. So what I'm really going to do here now is get into the nuts and bolts of the rhetorical assignment. What does the assignment prompt ask you to do? What are my tips for writing? How should a paper be structured? How does an example paper meet some of those requirements? So we'll do this all in one video, but in 2 parts. The first part will be very short, and I'll go over my tips for writing. And then in the second paper, I'll talk about how to structure the paper, the different pieces of it, thesis statements, topic sentences, body paragraphs, analysis. What does all that mean? So I'll explain what it means, and then I'll give you examples from one of the sample papers. And I'll mention with keeping the workload light, I should have said this on the previous slide, you won't have to do a reading, a lecture, and a discussion board next week. Next week, the final draft will be all you really need to do. And really, a lot of work should go into the rough draft. Do as much of the rough draft as you can so that when, and revise it multiple times, even before you turn in the rough draft, so that your partner, your peer review partner, can give you really good feedback. And then hopefully you could just kind of make some revisions for the final draft. So in a lot of ways, it would make sense for me to give you this week off from reading as well. But I really think you need to see some samples, see some guidelines. And so we do have a little bit of reading and a lecture this week. But let's get. So my tips for writing. Obviously, I have to do writing as part of my career. I teach writing. So I've got a lot of beliefs about how one should do writing and have what we call in this class a writing process. That you don't just sit down and write the paper 45 minutes before it's due, but that there is a process you follow. And I want to make really clear these steps, these tips, these suggestions are born out of my own experience of almost failing out of grad school because my writing was so bad. But I ended up passing and doing really well at the end. So how did my writing get better? This is how it got better, and that's why I think everyone, you included, should follow these steps whenever you write something important, such as a major paper, a writing project for this class. So here are the tips. Start your paper well in advance of the due date, so not 45 minutes before it's due, but much earlier. Why? Well, it takes time to write well, but there are other reasons. Because you should write multiple drafts. I know that can seem agonizing. It did for me when I was an undergrad. I wanted to just write it and be done with it. I'll tell you from experience, from reading a lot of other people's writing, the first draft is usually never very good for anybody, even the best writers in the world. In fact, the best writers in the world edit their writing till they have it as precise as they can make it. And it could still probably be improved. So write multiple drafts. Now, there's an important distinction here because on Canvas, there's a rough draft and a final draft. Those terms, rough and final, signal at a minimum 2 different versions of a paper. But I say write multiple drafts here, not write 2 drafts. So there can be many, many, many versions of a paper. And you should do many, many versions of a paper. You should do multiple versions before you turn a rough draft into Canvas, right? Because the rough draft you turn into Canvas is the one that your partner sees. And gives you feedback on. So if that is really good, you'll get even better feedback. If it's really, really rough, then their feedback's going to be kind of obvious, and you don't want obvious feedback. You want help with the things you can't see, can't find yourself. Reread your first draft before writing the second draft. That's obvious, but when you do that, take several days off between finishing the first draft and rereading it. Put it out of your mind. Let it cool off. Take a day where you work on other things, where you don't even think about it at all, and then come back to it when your mind is clear, maybe with a cup of coffee in the morning, whenever your mind is clear, and then read it, and you'll be surprised at the things you'll find. When you do your second draft, make the conclusion from your first draft the introduction to your second draft. What? What does he mean by that? What I mean is writing is a difficult thing, and we struggle, all of us, even the best writers. And one of the ways we come up with our best ideas is by struggling through the process of writing. So we often figure out what we're trying to say. We often find our thesis by writing an entire draft. I can't tell you how many papers I've read where I was really confused. I was like, what is the student trying to say? And then when I got to the end of the paper, I said, this is a great conclusion. It all makes sense now. Well, with academic writing, like the writing you do for this class, you don't want it to all make sense at the end. Agatha Christie stories, it all makes sense at the end, but that's a mystery. People want to wait and be surprised. When you're writing academic writing, your audience does not want to wait and be surprised. They'll stop reading if they don't know what the paper's about. So you've got to hook them at the start by really stating your main ideas clearly early on. And what if you don't know what your main ideas are when you write your first draft? You probably don't. You probably figure them out as you struggle through writing that first draft. So revise your paper in a way where you take what you figured out and you foreground that and revise the rest of the paper accordingly. This will be a service to your peer review partner and will put you in a better position for success if you can do that before you turn in that rough draft to Canvas. Continuing on here, once you've got that second draft or third or fourth draft, but it's more polished, the ideas are clear, have someone else read it. That's why we do peer review. But you can also have other people read it. EWU has an incredible writers center. We have professional staff who all have their MA or higher. By that I mean they're all professional writers. They're not students. They're not peer tutors. They are incredible. They will give you such good feedback on your writing. You can make virtual appointments right now. Go to the Writers Center. I'll even give you 2% extra credit on this paper. 2 points, not 2%, 2 points back. So if you get, 28 out of 30, you end up getting a 30 out of 30 if you went to the Writers Center. So I really believe in our Writers Center. It's a great resource to have others read your writing. You should do it. You can also have me read your writing too. I'll have my office hours. You can email me. I'd be happy to talk with you over Zoom about your paper, have me read a draft of it. I'd be happy to email you back feedback. So please seek me out if you would like feedback. And this week, as you're working on your thesis statement, try to get your thesis statement done early, like before, because you've got to do multiple drafts. You can send me your thesis statement via email, and I can give you some advice. Are you on the right track? Why or why not? So why do we have others read our paper? Because writing is this incredibly personal thing. By its nature, we do it in isolation, and we become very attached to it because we've worked so hard on it. So it can be really challenging for us to see our own errors, our own struggles, and our own writing. We need someone who can be objective, someone for whom it's not personal, someone who's detached from it, not as attached as we are. So find someone else to read it, because you have to connect with your audience, right? With rhetorical analysis, we've been talking about the relationship between author and audience. So you need to connect to that audience. you're not writing to yourself. You're writing to an audience. You're not trying to persuade yourself. You already believe this. So what's the best way to reach an audience? To give yourself one before you turn it in. Have others read it once you've done a couple or a few drafts and got a pretty solid draft. Thoroughly revise multiple drafts, so you can do 3, 4, 5, however many it takes you to get the paper. Well, at a minimum, I would say you want at least 3. A rough draft before you send it to your peer review partner, and then the draft you send to your peer review partner via Canvas, and then, your draft that you edit, your final draft. But I think it'd be better to do even more if you can. That's my and then, of course, submit the final one to Canvas. So those are my tips. Those are what saved me as a writer. Hopefully they can help you either in this class or ideally in this class and in other classes, other writing situations, other classes, writing a cover letter for a job application, writing an important email to your boss or a coworker. These are the salvation tips for writing. All right, so how do you structure your paper for a class like this, and what are some examples we can see? One of the keys is this image, signposting. Hopefully this image burns in your mind from this lecture, because it can be so hard to follow someone else's thoughts. Have you ever read someone else's paper and you're like, huh, what's going on? I hate to say it, but that's probably what people think about your writing. Because it's this personal thing, right? We're in our own heads when we write. So we've got to make what we're doing clear to our readers. We need to give our readers good signposts. We need to guide them through the essay, give them clues to help them follow our train of thought. So this second portion of the lecture is about how to do that. I want to first, before I get into the specific tips for signposting, talk about guidelines for reading these sample papers, because it can be easy to misinterpret how to approach the sample paper. So I want to give you as much help with that as I can. So they are not templates. They are examples. You can learn things from them, and you should. That'll help you, but they're not plug and play. Don't take a writer's style or a writer's sentences and plug in your ideas. No, see what they do that they do well and kind of mimic those things. See what they do not well and try to avoid those things. But don't think of it like a formula where you can plug your ideas in, because no essay is perfect. So I should note that these papers focus on other texts, not Hercule Poirot stories, because I've taught this class many different ways. I think Hercule Poirot has been really helpful to us this quarter, so I'm asking you to write on him for this paper, but in other classes in the past, we did different things. And so I'm using those papers rather than from other times I've taught the Hercule Poirot curriculum, because I feel like if the sample papers were on Hercule Poirot, it would just be too easy to treat it like a template. And I want you to see these as examples, as guides, not templates or formulas. Hopefully that distinction makes sense. So if we're seeing the sample papers this way, what do we ask as we read them? How do they help us? These are some things to think about. Does the author provide a clear and direct thesis? You're going to learn in a few minutes, if you don't already know what a good thesis is. Does the paper have one? Why or why not? Does the author analyze evidence to support the thesis? You need evidence, and you can't just have that evidence. You need to analyze that evidence. Show me how it proves your thesis. Does the writer do that? Does the author structure a paper in an effective way? What is an effective structure? We're going to talk about that. Do these sample papers, which ones? Do they have that or not? What other rhetorical moves does the author make? So we've been talking about all kinds of different strategies to have success as a writer and a communicator. What does the author of the sample papers do that is helpful, that you can say, hey, I could make this move as well, and that'd help me, or make a similar move? Overall, what seems very effective or less effective for the author? So in general, strengths and weaknesses. I frame it as effective or less effective because I think it's not wise to talk about good and bad writing. We have a purpose, we have a goal when we write. Our writing is either effective or not in achieving that goal, but it's not really a yes or no question. It's on a spectrum. So some pieces of writing are very effective and persuasive, some less so. And then finally, what do you get from this paper? How can it help you in your own writing? So these are the things to think about as you read the sample papers rather than copy their style and format. I want to real quickly recap the assignment instructions. I know you've seen them a lot, but they should be fresh in your head as we evaluate this assignment or this sample paper and see how it does a good job of signposting. So you choose a Hyoko Rose story you've not read yet. Analyze the relationship between author and audience. Remember, Christy really uses her immense understanding of audience to direct the reader's attention away from the clues that could help you solve her difficult mystery. That's how she makes a mystery difficult. And her deep understanding of audience is why she's our case study for rhetorical analysis, because you need to get better at relating to your audience. We all do. And she can help us. She's a master at it. 2 levels of misdirection. So 2 of the ways she often uses that understanding of audience to kind of distract readers from the clues that are essential are Hercule Poirot's disarming of himself in front of the possible suspects, possible killers, and then presenting suspects that make us want to lean one direction, even if logic would dictate we go another direction. The perfect example is Major Eustace from Murder in the Mews. We want him to be the bad guy so badly, we overlook the fact that he has no motive. And we can't solve the mystery if we fall victim to thinking he has to be the bad guy. But she creates him as a bad guy. He is a bad guy. He's just not the agent behind the mystery we're trying to solve in that story. So she brilliantly pulls it off. Remember, credibility, emotion, timing, and logic are essential to any author when they're making their argument. And finally, the question you should answer. So this should be the statement at the end of your intro, your thesis statement, not a question, but you answering this question should be your thesis statement. Does Christie create a fair and compelling mystery? So points 2 through 4 here are all things you can use as you gather your evidence to present your case of your answer to the question, does she create a fair and compelling mystery? And so this question here is like step 3 of analytical reading, judging, critiquing the book. And what you do as your evidence is kind of like steps 2 and 4, or steps 1 to 2, of analytical reading, where you analyze the text and read it like a demanding reader. So you got to read this story, show your understanding of it so that you can give a critique of it in your thesis. These are some guidelines for how to go about doing that. They're not hard and fast rules, but if you do these things, you'll surely accomplish the assignment. But if you find other ways to read and understand the story and give a fair critique of it, I'll definitely accept that. I'm very flexible as an instructor. All right, so what should the paper itself actually look like? And how do you do good signposts to guide your reader through it, make it flow easy, make it easy to read? I'm going to pull examples from one of the sample papers as we do this. Now, like I said, these sample papers are not perfect. They do some things well, other things not well. Hopefully, they'll more cast a light on, help you see, how do I write a thesis? How do I write a topic sentence? How do I transition? How do I do analysis, etc.? Seeing how these writers do that fairly well can help you do it better. But again, you don't want to copy them. So you need signposts, traffic lights, street signs, lines on the road. Our paragraphs and sentences are meant to help guide the reader. So we might not think that every sentence is important. We might not think that every paragraph is important, but in reality, every sentence, every paragraph is important. That's why I keep my word count requirements low, because I believe in quality over quantity. And if you plan your sentences and your paragraphs strategically and revise to arrange them in a logical order, your paper will be so much easier to read, and you'll have a much happier reader or audience, which helps you get closer to achieving your goal. So one of these types of sentences that can be a street sign is a thesis statement. A thesis should be clear, specific, which means it's very narrow. You don't want a broad thesis. You don't want to try to cover too much. The less you try to cover, the better your paper will be. Some students worry about running out of things to talk about. Again, I keep my word counts low. Don't worry about that. Worry about having a good specific topic. The broader your argument is, the harder it is to prove. So keep it narrow. Clear. The thesis should be the clearest worded sentence in the paper. Read it out loud. Read it to others. Revise it till it makes sense. It needs to take a position. It can't be a fact. It has to be an argument, and you should state it at the end of the intro. Why? Signposting. If you have a really clear statement of your thesis at the end of the intro, your reader will know exactly what you're saying, and it'll be the freshest thing in their mind as they go and read the rest of the paper. Paper's going to flow well. It's a good signpost. So here are some other types of signposts. Thesis statements, it signals the argument of the paper. That's why it's at the end of the intro. If you start with a thesis, your reader will be like, huh? But if you give a little bit of background and context and then end the intro with your thesis, they'll know why you're arguing what you're arguing. They'll be prepared to read the rest of the paper. Topic sentences. Just as your thesis is an argument or a position, you have little mini arguments or supporting arguments that are the ideas that prove your thesis. You should devote a paragraph to each of these, and you should say what that argument is at the start of each paragraph. If I'm reading your paragraph and the argument of your paragraph, you don't state it till the end, it's like the same thing as finding the thesis and the conclusion. Bad surprise for the reader. The reader wants to know what that paragraph is about before they read the paragraph. So you got to have an argument. Can't be a fact. It's got to be an argument. And you got to say it in the first sentence. If you do that, your paper will flow so smoothly. It'll be so easy for the audience to read. Transitions. You've got to build bridges from paragraph to paragraph. Each paragraph has an argument, an idea. What's the connection between those ideas? They're all proving your thesis. You know that. Your reader doesn't. Your reader doesn't know what you know because you've been living in your head writing this paper. You've really got to spell things out for the reader. It might sound simplistic. It might seem obvious to you. It's not obvious to your reader. You've got to write for readers, not yourself. You've got to spell it out for them. As the lecture goes on and we look at these examples from the first sample paper, we'll see how to do good transitions. Finally, paragraph breaks. This might seem really insignificant, but where you end a paragraph makes sense. Don't try to cover two topics in one paragraph. Unless it's a really complex topic, don't spill it over two paragraphs. A paragraph break signals to the reader when you're moving on to something new. So if you break your paragraphs really strategically, again, your paper will be easier to follow. Signposts. All right, so what should a thesis statement entail? We already talked about it a little. So here's an example of what we just talked about from the sample paper. In a simple 1 minute and 40 seconds, the trailer for Finding Dory captured meaning and intrigued many for this unexpected sequel through the rhetorical appeals we use daily. The trailer intrigued people. So this writer's taking a position. What is the goal of a movie trailer? She's analyzing a movie trailer. What is the goal of that? To get people to want to see the movie. Well, if it intrigued them, then it was successful in achieving its goal. Saying that a text is successful in achieving its goal is a position. You're making an argument. Someone else could say the Finding Dory trailer failed. So you have to persuade those people. So it's an argument. And the word intrigued is a good word choice because it's kind of a synonym, right? So instead of just saying that the trailer got people to see the movie, she's saying it was intriguing to people, drew them in. This thesis is also narrow or specific because she says the trailer captured meaning. So she gives a reason why it intrigued them. So it's a specific rhetorical strategy. It's got kind of a meaning or a message behind it. When you watch the trailer, you can see that this is not just kind of a movie with like a boring story, but it's a movie with a powerful message. You get that in the trailer, you want to go see it. So the trailer is effective in achieving its goal, and there's a specific reason as to why it achieves its goal. Clear thesis because it's an argument, and there's a reason why. Topic sentences. Remember, these are the sentences that start each paragraph, and they need to be a little mini argument. They announce the argument of the paragraph. Remember, first sentence, so the reader knows what the paragraph is about before they get too far. And then good paragraphs focus on a single point. Remember the signpost of paragraph breaks. You don't want to cover too much in a paragraph. You don't want to stretch your ideas across too many paragraphs. You want the reader to be able to look at the paper and say, this paragraph's about this one's about this, and then boom, it'll be just so easy for them to read. A happy reader is a reader more likely to agree with you. So usually the topic sentence begins the paragraph. I already said that. Here's the example from the paper. In addition to the logical aspect of Finding Dory, the emotional appeals also draw attention to the trailer. So how is this an argument? It's a stance, because she's saying the emotional aspects of the trailer are one of the ways it draws people in. So that phrase, draw attention, is really similar to the phrase intrigue, since you have a connection to the thesis there. And you also have this argument that it uses emotion successfully. Again, some people might disagree, so it's an argument. But because of that phrase that draws attention, it's an argument that is connected to the thesis statement. So it's helping bring the whole paper. How about transition statements? How do you get from one paragraph to another? It's another signpost. One of the ways is what I call topical transitions. So each paragraph has a topic. Remember the term topic sentences. And ideally, all those topics are related because they all support the thesis. So if they all support the thesis, what is the connection from one to another? They help readers move from thought to thought, from sentence to sentence, from paragraph to paragraph. And then if you have a paper on topic A, or a paragraph on topic A and a paragraph on topic B, what's the connection between those two? You can often embed that connection in your topic sentence. And this writer does it here in the same sentence we looked at. We'll look at it again, this time looking for the transition. In addition to the logical aspect of Finding Dory trailer, the emotional appeals also draw attention to the trailer. So why is this a good topical transition? That phrase, in addition, and the word also later in the sentence show that the writer is connecting two things, logic and emotion. So one paragraph was about logic, another paragraph, this paragraph, is about emotion. And so she's saying they both draw attention to the trailer. They both draw people in and make people want to watch the movie. So remember, draw attention connects to the thesis. The fact that they do this well is an argument. So you've got connection to the thesis, argument, connection between the two ideas. Paragraph A is logic, paragraph B is emotion. How are they connected? They both do the thing that we claim in the thesis the trailer does. And so it's all connected and woven together in a relatively short sentence. But keywords like in addition, also, draw attention, logic, emotion, those keywords are the signpost. They're pulling everything together. And so this is why I say every word, every sentence, every paragraph is important, because they can all be talking to each other to make for a cohesive paper. This is an example of that. So if this is the first sentence of the paragraph, what should the rest of the paragraph look like? One of the handouts I gave you has a common helpful body paragraph structure. Your thesis or your conclusion shouldn't be structured this way, but your body paragraph should. And so here's an outline of that structure. Starts with the topic sentence. We already talked about that. After the topic sentence, you can give, if necessary, not always, a little bit of background and context. Why background and context? Because next is your evidence or your example, right? You have a thesis, you have many arguments in your topic sentences that prove your thesis. How do you prove your thesis? By proving the topic sentences. And if you prove the topic sentences, they will subsequently in turn prove your thesis. So what do you need to prove something? Evidence, right? That's how Poirot proved something, right? He had the ashtray, but no smell of smoke. He had the destroyed golf clubs. He had evidence to prove his theory about Jane Tunderleaf's attempt to make suicide look like murder. You need evidence to prove your theory that proves your thesis in each paragraph. So how do we then use the evidence, right? Analysis. You have to explain the connection. If you just give the evidence and then move on, your reader will be like, what? Even though you know how the evidence proves your topic sentence, you gotta explain that. So think about Hercule. He goes into detail. He explains why the ashtray but no smoke, no smell of smoke is important. He explains why the golf clubs are important. He says they mean this. You've got an example. You know what it means. Your reader doesn't know what it means. You have to tell your reader what it means. In many ways, this analysis is the most important part of the paper because it's where you clinch your argument. It's your explanation to the jury, to the audience. So, gotta have it. Let's go through the rest of that body paragraph and see the sentences where the student does this. So, the topic sentence, we covered that already. Background and context. We knew it was about emotion. So what does she say next? The raw emotion appeal is a rhetorical appeal called pathos, one that is most frequent throughout the trailer. Imagine not remembering your family, where you came from, and all you are left with is the feeling of missing someone. So this reader, or this author, kind of reaches out to the reader and evokes an emotion. We, the reader, can now identify with this trailer. So just a little bit more background and context shows us the specific type of emotional appeal the trailer is making. What is the evidence? This feeling is presented when Dory states that she misses her family and asks Marlin, the father of Nemo, if he has ever felt this way. So that phrase, this feeling, it's another great transition phrase. It's another example of the sentences and the words talking to each other, because she has stated that the paragraph is about emotion. She's explained to us what kind of emotion. She's now saying this emotion, this feeling, shows up in the movie in this specific scene. And then she describes the scene. When writing about Hercule Poirot, you could quote from the story like I have done in our lectures. You could also paraphrase what happens or describe what happens. Because she's talking about a movie trailer, she describes it here. Finally, the analysis, the most important part. At this point, Finding Nemo fans are approached through an emotional connection. That's it. That's the analysis. That's the connection. She says more because you should always elaborate. Analysis should also always be several sentences. But right there, we see the logic of her argument, right? It's just in the trailer itself, we're seeing a connection between two characters that evokes the first movie. If we're fans of the first movie, that's going to draw us in through our emotions to her point. So make us want to see it. This is a great analytical insight that's connecting the evidence to the topic sentence. She goes on to say, relating that lost, lonely feeling Marlin had when Nemo was taken is now shown through Dory's emotions about missing her parents. So she just elaborates, goes into more detail. I've seen these movies, so the first sentence was enough for me. For readers who haven't seen the movies, the second sentence that explains the idea further is probably necessary. So do several sentences of analysis. All right, so that's, it. Introduction, several body paragraphs like that to make your case of why the story is a compelling mystery or not. Conclusion should be short and sweet. You don't need to restate every point, just restate your main point, tie up any loose ends. Why is the argument important? That's something you could address in your conclusion. So you've got the structure of the paper. What's my final advice before turning you loose to write this paper? Remember the 3 stages of analytical reading. What is the book about? In other words, what is its subject? What is the message of the book? So what stance does it take on that subject? Do you agree or disagree with this message? What does this mean for your thesis? Because you're arguing, since it's a rhetorical analysis, you're arguing about how effectively the author creates the text. Well, this means you need to reach at least the second stage. You need to identify the message of the story, because you're making an argument about how effectively and persuasively the author conveys that message. You should probably also get to level 3 or stage 3. That's more challenging, and you don't necessarily have to argue that she communicates the message effectively or not. And whether you agree with the message or not isn't necessarily pertinent to how well she conveys it, but thinking that through could help you answer the question of whether she conveys the message effectively or not, right? Because if you agree or you disagree, you can take a step back, you can reflect, you can say, why do I agree? Why do I disagree? And that might give you what you need to complete the rhetorical analysis and come up with a thesis that says she's successful in conveying this message or not. So those are my tips for how to do well on the first paper. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Remember, I will have my Zoom office hours. I will be available via email. More than happy. Would love to look at thesis statements as you're figuring out your ideas and at drafts during that week between rough draft and final draft if you want more than peer feedback and more than writer-centered feedback. But either way, whether I read your paper then or after you turn in the final draft, I cannot wait to read them. Really looking forward to it.